Hi guys, my name is Diva and I'm a Libra, hence Diva the Libra, and let's talk about tropes today. More specifically, the tropification of books, as it's been called. Disclaimer, I'm going to be speaking largely and to the contemporary romance genre, not because I'm like punching down on that genre. I hate when people like engage with that genre in a way that's like obviously disingenuous because like they don't take it seriously and they want to belittle it. Me, more so, I'm coming from the perspective of like that is the genre I feel like I like currently know the best because like that's the one I like read the most from. But also I feel like that's where most prevalently you can see like kind of like what we're calling the tropification of like books taking place. And so just like wanted to put that out there first. Let's jump into it. First, what is a trope? Taken from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it is a common or overused themed or figure of speech. There are other definitions, but like this is the one that I'm referring to. And then I wanted to read a quick segment from an article that was published by the Michigan Daily, which is like our Tropes reading books that was published this year, which starts off with, in the modern publishing world, tropes have become a prevalent form of marketing to hook readers and make new releases feel familiar by using token phrases like enemies to lovers or dark academia. Categorizing books in this way was previously left up to readers who used the label to identify common literary devices used by contemporary authors. This is kind of going to become important later. A more recent phenomenon, however, is publishers and marketing agencies beginning to take advantage of these long-established phrases to popularize new releases and sell more novels to an influenceable audience. Though such tropification is most prevalent in genres like contemporary romance, it's not unheard of in the worlds of literary fiction, fantasy, or even mystery thrillers. So like I was saying, even though I'm going to be touching on like contemporary romance and like romance specifically, this does happen of course like across other genres. Think like The Chosen One, which we see across fantasy, dystopian worlds like all the time. The conversation surrounding like tropes and like their utilization in like media and books and things like that and their execution isn't a new one, but I feel like it's not one that I necessarily had at the forefront of my mind until it happened on Book Talk a couple of months ago. This conversation had been in the works for a while on the app, but I feel like one of the, maybe cumulative isn't the right words, but one of the like, oh, this was really bringing it to the forefront is when two diagrams for two books that were being published, one by Tessa Bailey and Elena Armas, were released. When the conversation surrounding like the tropification of books and like tropes first started like months prior to that, I'm not gonna lie, it made me like quirk my eyebrow a little bit because it did feel at the beginning that people were just talking about the fact that they could like recognize tropes in fiction and in media, and I was like, that doesn't really feel like tropification, that just feels like discernment. But I think when we're talking about like the tropification of books, which I don't really know if I like love that phrasing for it, but it like gets it across pretty aptly, I think we're all talking about the execution of those tropes and the book feeling very surface level with the intent to like really get those tropes to the forefront. A large problem being, for example, if you're just trying to surround your whole book or like many segments of a book around a one-bed trope, an enemies to lovers trope, it starts to then not necessarily like lose its individuality, but more so in the sense, are you trying to fit what is supposed to be a circle into a square just because you want to market that book to more people? Because at the end of the day, that's what all of those kind of like stickers for like enemies to lovers, best friends like ex-boyfriend, they're all meant to be marketing tools. The problem with that, which it made me kind of laugh when I saw somebody say it, is they likened the tropification of books to what they also called like the AO3ification of books, which is that the lines between fan fiction and published works have been blurring for a long time, but like very obviously they are right now. I do not, of course, think there's anything inherently wrong with the connection between like fan fiction and like originally published works, but I do think with people putting fan fiction on Goodreads against like the fanfic authors like Wishes, or like bookbinding like fan fiction, like trying to like sell it for profit, we could go down like a whole different conversation lane with that. As I was saying, it made me laugh when somebody called it the AO3ification because at first I was like, are they punching down on fan fiction? But I was like, no, they're indicating the ways in which utilizing tropes as kind of not just like a marketing, but as a indicating what the work is going to be about largely comes from fan fiction. When people are saying like men in a coffee shop, one bed trope, enemies to lovers, those were all often shorthand used on AO3 or fanfiction.net, and it works because when it comes to fanfiction, there is a canon, detailed, structured background study for the characters that already exist. So when you're coming to fanfiction, you're not looking for like maybe the canon exactly, but you may be looking for like, I want to see the characters in like a coffee shop. There will be like a coffee shop tag. I want to see the characters in like medieval times. There's a medieval times tag. And because the canon, for example, if you're building off of that for your fan fiction, has already done the background for these characters, like things like that. When you go into the fan fiction, you already go into it with that knowledge from the canon where you don't have to think about, oh, a character like behaves like this, because you know from the canon they already behave like that. So you're taking that previous knowledge and then you're just looking for like, I want to see these characters in a situation where they're like fighting zombies trope tag, if this all makes sense. And this is in part why it doesn't really work for original stories, because there's no canon to kind of refer to. For original stories, if you're utilizing tropes at the forefront, more often than not, other things suffer, like the writing quality or like characterization or like all the other things that are supposed to be at the forefront with the tropes kind of embedded in that story. And I say characterization especially because I think it is so important to form around like who you want your characters to be before trying to slot them into like tropes and common situations. And so mind you, what I want to make clear, I'm not saying tropes are like inherently bad things. I feel like that's what was happening at the beginning of this conversation on Book Talk at first, and I was like, oh, we can find tropes like everywhere in fiction, like kind of cliches or like commonly used situations. There's nothing inherently wrong with implementing that into a story. It's all about like the execution of it and how the story navigates itself around it. And so in thinking about the tropification of books and the ways in which like tropes are being utilized, I wanted to use the rest of the video to talk about the ways in which I do not like romantic tropes being executed. It gets dark at like 4 in the afternoon, so I turned my light on. Of course, these are just my opinions, it's not laws, but I've noticed most recently with my reading is that these are the ways I often do not like these tropes to be executed in original stories. First, let's talk about a trope that I thought I was falling out of love with recently, second chance romance. Second chance is often told in a way as such, told in the past and the past and the present, alternating like timelines, which is all leading up to like the big mysterious secret of why the couple broke up. Do I think there's anything inherently wrong with this kind of storytelling when it comes to second chance romance? No, I can understand also why it's so popular because it leaves the reader in anticipation of, oh my god, what's the big secret? Like, why won't they talk about it? But in my opinion, this execution can run into a couple of problems. First being the timelines, I know that there's a way to make each of them like equally as captivating, but I find because in the present timeline more often than not, they're trying to hide from, and by they, I mean like the author, are trying to hide from the reader why the couple broke up or drew them apart for so long. We usually spend too little time with them in the present and too much time with them in the past, which in my opinion, a lot of second chance romances fail at making me understand like why the couple needs to be back together. I think it's very romantic. I can also get lost in why this couple like fell in love when they were younger or like what really brought them together in the first place, but I also need to understand why they got their second chance, and a lot of books like don't convince me of that. But back to what I was saying in terms of the big secret looming over the present chapters all the time, I think if executed well, this method of storytelling can be super interesting. I love when things come full circle, but I also think that more often than not, it just ends up kind of stagnant too, where with the big mystery looming over the present, the past sometimes is like trying to like fulfill those answers, but neither can really do that until the end because it's all leading up to like the answer that the book doesn't want to tell the reader until the end. I love a little bit of mystery, like keep me guessing, to be honest. Like if you kept me intrigued up until this point, until the end, until I want to know what's going on. However, more often than not, the secret at the end is one of two things, which is really horrifying or, that was it. In one instance, when it's like, oh, that's it kind of leaves you, at least me as the reader, feeling like all of that gravity given to like that secret. This is often how I feel about miscommunication, and miscommunication can be done and executed well. I think honestly it's something as a situational device I'm like loving more and more as I get older, because I feel like at first it used to just really annoy and like grate on me, but there are situations where you find like you just don't have the right timing or like you just didn't communicate well, and that kind of like yearning or not getting your feelings across, like when it's done well, like it's done well. But what I do not like is like a character A overheard like character B saying something. They were right around the corner. It was very obviously taken out of context. They don't speak for 15 years. Are you kidding me? And on the other end, sometimes I think the book really does want to like wow you. It wants to leave you in shock. It wants to make you feel like maybe like those 300 plus pages of the characters going back and forth was worth something. The secret will be like something really devastating, but to the point that I don't think the characters should like be coupled up and be able to come back from. And I think that's something that is often lost sometimes in the second chance aspect of it all, but you do need to convince me that these characters need to be back together. I don't want to spoil, but an unfortunate like perfect example of that in my opinion, Love in Other Words, was a book that like was largely recommended as peak second chance romance. Of course, I understand people have like subjective opinions, but the ending twist to that book, I don't think these people should be together. And I also think we need to unpack what that secret was that was keeping you guys apart for like 15 years, because that was crazy to say the least. I understand why this is like a popular way to execute this trope. I don't overall like always dislike it, even though I do have critiques of it. I know it had like mixed reviews, but I enjoyed this kind of execution and it's kind of a funny story. But again, a lot of things also aided in like me enjoying that where it came to like the writing quality, like the chemistry between the characters. And even then it did still run into the problem where we kind of got to the end and I was like, that was a little lackluster, like secret-wise. And honestly, this may just be a perspective because it was like a refreshing change of pace, but I didn't realize how nice it is to like know early on in a second chance romance why the couple kind of broke up until I read The X-Vows this year. It's pretty clearly alluded to within like the first 10 chapters, like why the characters broke up, even though they directly like never really talk about it. It's like the main character kind of like speaking to us. But that was really refreshing. I didn't really realize as the audience, because it allowed me to kind of like lay the foundation for the rest of how I viewed them, how I viewed like the possibility of them like getting back together. Knowing in the beginning allowed me to like view their interactions from like a different lens, kind of make me think about like maybe like the space they need to take from one another to like come back to one another. And it didn't feel like the book was hinging on this overlooming secret of what happened back then, but more so how can they move forward from this, which was a nice change of pace. Moving on to the next, I'm going to lump fake dating and marriage of convenience into the same box because they're kind of two sides of the same coin. My gripe maybe lies I recognize a little bit more with fake dating because I feel like the execution of this trope more often than not falls into this trapped in marriage of convenience. Sometimes with marriage of convenience, the characters aren't hiding the reasoning from others about like why they need to be together, but that often is the case I feel like with fake dating. It also, I guess, in terms of if we're comparing one to the other, one does feel a bit more juvenile than the other, but in both cases with the execution of this trope, I believe the stakes sincerely matter. And by stakes, I mean that there needs to be some gravity to the reasoning that the characters believe that they need to be fake dating. And by that, I mean it doesn't necessarily need to be something that like I view maybe as like deeply serious, but like the characters need to believe like strongly enough that they need to be fake dating, that comes across to me as the reader. Whether it be as simple as like character A just broke up with like their girlfriend. They desperately don't want them to know that they don't have a date to the prom. So they ask like their best friend to take them. As such, they feel like they need to like lay the foundation for their new relationship. Do you understand where I'm kind of going with this? It's not something that really needs to make me think like, oh my god, but it needs to make me feel like, oh, if people discovered that they were fake dating or that they were not really married for the right reasons, that there would be like an issue. When there's not stakes, it's just kind of like, it's dating. Nothing is really like standing in their way. This is unfortunately how I felt about Honey and Spice. Fake dating was supposed to be like a huge crux of the book, and when it did come to the reasoning like why they were, it just kind of made me go like, there's really no reason why you guys like need to be doing this, and I don't even think you as the characters believe that you need to be doing this either. It's obvious that you guys just kind of like each other. I find that more often than not, this execution just leaves me wanting more, where I'm like, if somebody figures out that you guys are like not really married or like not actually dating, what's going to be the fallout? Is it that you love this person that you're fake dating and you don't want them to find out? Do you understand where I'm going with this like again? And even though I said that I would group them together, I do feel like I laid most of the flack at fake dating's feet. If you guys have romance book recommendations with the fake dating trope, please leave them in the comments. I'm like genuinely curious. And now we've come to a hot one, enemies to lovers. I feel like my biggest thing is that enemies to lovers is not bully romance and it should not be executed as such. I feel like their character setups are supposed to be kind of different. For me, bullying is more often than not one character doing exactly what that says, which is bullying. And I feel like the difference from enemies to lovers is that more often than not with a bully romance, the other character who is not the bully is kind of in a disenfranchised, they are being bullied, like positioned by somebody who is in a position of like power above them. With enemies to lovers, there are many times instances where, let's think hierarchy-wise, they're not on like the same level and positions of power. Sometimes it'll be like office workers, somebody is the boss, somebody is like the assistant in that case. But more often than not with enemies to lovers, I feel like there's kind of a, symbiotic isn't the right word, but they are able to go like tit for tat. Additionally, I feel like this is something that ties in with like many tropes, but it's something that is most obvious with enemies to lovers and miscommunication. The idea of like obliviousness I wanted to touch on briefly. Like I kind of touched on with my earlier example of character A standing behind a corner listening to like character B accidentally like not really like talk shit about them. In terms of enemies to lovers, we cannot believe for like 70% of the book that character A hates character B because of like a complete misunderstanding that character B like misperceived and character A is actually in love with them, and we as the audience can all tell. And I will not lie, this is a little bit of an annoyance of mine because when it's done well, it can be done very well, where it kind of feels like the audience, the reader, is having a secret conversation with the author, where character B, for some reason or another, like very much thinks that like character A hates them, but character A, like you realize through like little things, is very much in love with or like with them. However, a bit can always take itself too far, and I feel like that is something that often happens with obliviousness, where it doesn't feel like we're having a secret conversation with the author anymore, but that the book is treating its character who is oblivious like they're stupid. And I say this not in the sense of like they're misunderstanding something, but in the sense of where you can tell that the book is deliberately making them avoid what is like a very obvious answer because they don't want them to like figure it out yet. Come on. I also have a lot of thoughts about how important I believe like communication and dialogue and banter is to the enemies to lovers trope. Dialogue, of course, like overall is important quality-wise in like any book, but I feel like banter-wise, characters being able to go back and forth, not just like throwing barbs at one another, but that's for another time. And alas, grumpy sunshine. I think this is a trope where more often I see where it feels like I'm reading the same stock character over and over again, where I'm saying the grump can be grumpy, they can even be like asshole-ish, but I want them to have some personality to that. Is their whole thing that they're just super mean and grumpy? Same with the sunshine. Is their whole thing that they're just like happy and bubbly? More often than not, when they're written in certain ways to the point of like naivety and like overextending themselves, give me more. Like I was saying in the beginning of this video, Characterization is at the crux of a book, and if you're trying to like slot these characters, especially into these two positions, it can make for very bland storytelling. I always feel like I would be remiss if I did not bring the notion of like gender into this one, because more often than not, when it comes to heterosexual romance, the man is the grump and the woman is the sunshine, and it starts to creep more often than not into bully territory, where he is not just like a little rude, mean to her, he like bullies and belittles her. Okay, I will say admittedly, friends to lovers is one of my least favorite tropes. I find that it's executed in a very lackluster, boring way. What has to be at the crux of friends to lovers is making me understand why these characters are friends. It cannot be that one of them became friends with the other because they're like lusting over them, or friends to lovers is also like more often than not told in alternating dynamics between the two characters. And if we're in one character's head and all they're thinking about when it comes to the other character is like sex, sex, sex. This is not me saying that one character cannot desire another, of course, but I think one of the best parts about friends to lovers, when it is executed well, is the yearning, the understanding of like changing their dynamic from friends to lovers is like a big step for them that can have like repercussions. I feel like now that I'm thinking about it, friends to lovers is kind of similar to marriage of convenience and fake dating in the sense of stakes. Do I think across the board, yeah, there should always be stakes. There should always be a reasoning for what's keeping us from doing this, what's stopping us from doing this. But I say that in the sense of for friends to lovers, I need there to be an understanding of if you don't want to move your relationship into like the lover's part, make me understand why. Is it because your friendship is so secret to you? It's so deep to you? Are you afraid of like your relationship changing? Make me understand like why they're friends. And I feel like I do want to jump back to what I said before, because I feel like I can't just like leave that hanging. I often think that like friends to lovers is the most lackluster trope because there's really more often than not a lot for them to like fight against except themselves sometimes. Sometimes there's external forces. More often than not, the crux of it is like for some reason or another, they can't be together because of their friendship sometimes. Like friends to lovers needs yearning. Love triangles are a little bit of a tricky one because let me fully stress, as long as nobody in the triangle is related, we're thinking about the way in which love triangles are like colloquially depicted, where it's not everybody is in love with another, but where there's one focal character and then there's like two options or choices. As long as nobody is related, my thought process is usually like, why can't they all just, why not both? But since that's not the case, and we're talking about the way in which love triangles are like more often than not executed, but I simply detest when it's made very obvious that the character of one of the choices is like completely shifted or changed because the book wants to make it very clear that they want you to also be rooting for a choice. Boo, tomato, tomato, tomato. Not only do I think this is very lazy characterization, it kind of annoys me as a reader because it feels like the book didn't trust us to like be able to come to our own conclusion or our own choice. I feel like when it comes to love triangles, more often than not, but not always. I read a love triangle recently that was a standalone. Sometimes they are across like multiple books. It's a series. And when around the third or second book, it's not, oh, there were little Easter eggs that this character was behaving like strangely, that they were going to portray like XYZ, and it simply just happens out of nowhere. I'm like, you changed their personality or their dynamic because you wanted us to choose the other choice, obviously. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers for the Shatter Me series. But when I read that series in high school, though it was pretty obvious, I feel like at a certain point, like who the end game was going to be, this always annoyed me about the shift in Adam's personality, because I feel like some people try to come to the conclusion that, oh, this was always foretold, it was kind of clearly seen, but I was like, no, he kind of tweaked on her. It was very obvious that like his complete shift in personality, not to be funny, but I do think it's possible to do like a character's like changing like personality dynamic. Is there going to be a betrayal without it feeling like whiplash in the sense, oh, you just like completely changed elements about them because you wanted me to feel like there was no other choice but the other one. Do I think all readers will ever be satisfied when it comes to the end of a love triangle? I have never read one where that's the case, but I think it's most important for me, in addition to what I just said, to create tension, to create guessing. And if there's not tension and yearning, the chemistry between whoever is like the obvious choice needs to be like off the charts to be so for real. I also feel like I maybe want to talk about chemistry in another video because that is something that is like intangible, but when you read it, you can tell what it is, and when you see it, you can tell that it's good. Well, that's for another time. And last but not least, let's talk about a trope I don't really think I read anymore, but I feel like it's the last one that I had on my predetermined list, which is best friend sibling. I feel like the execution of this trope just falls flat when you don't understand why the character who feels betrayed. I feel like this is also a trope that I feel like is more well received by me, maybe when like the characters skew younger. I do think this level of gravity can also be given to characters who are like older, but I think when the characters are, and I say younger, I mean like in high school, the hurt cuts a little bit deeper for some reason. I feel like maybe because the characters are like coming into their own, maybe they're going through like teenagehood, which can be like a very volatile time. Make me understand like why the character feels betrayed. Do they feel like they're always overlooked? Do they feel like they're putting their friendship in jeopardy. Like, make me understand whoever feels hurt, make me understand their perspective, because otherwise I feel like more often than not when it comes to like the climax of this, I'm usually just like rolling my eyes. Especially if the characters are older. Like, I understand why there would be like weirdness present, but if you feel like you need to hide this relationship, like, make me understand why you need to hide it, and so I can understand the gravity or the seriousness of the situation. And that's that. Like I said in the beginning of this video, the tropes inherently are not the problem. It's all about their execution. I feel like tropes are constantly present in like fiction. That's why we were able to call them tropes, because we started to recognize the same kind of cliches, the same situations characters are being put in like over and over again, and then they were nominated as such. But it becomes a problem when in original stories, having the trope present is just being put to the forefront, and other things like characterization or writing quality are putting on the back burner because we want to make it clear that they're going to like share one bed. What makes for me a romance interesting and compelling is like, even if the characters are put in the same situations over and over again in terms of tropes, what makes the characters like individual, what makes them tick. And so let me know in the comments what you think about this topic. It's very interesting to me as somebody who like reads fanfic and also reads like original stories and also thinks maybe too much about this topic. Let's chat. Thank you for being here.